I like to begin I like to begin every opportunity just to say welcome. Welcome for being here. Like no stories come alive without the act of communion. It is not a solo sport. And so your presence being here creates more and more space to foster this really ancient art to continue to live among us. And I really want to invite you to take a moment to tune into your heart, to tune into um, your what is alive in your psyche, what's coming alive for you right now, and just life in general, and what is asking to be tended to, what is asking to be tended to. And if by some magical of alchemy or the oldest ancient art form among humans on how to communicate could speak directly to that today, let us set that intention. And I'm going to invite you also um, to like be on screen with us today. I'll be looking at you. I place you on gallery view, and I always suggest that if you want to place yourself on gallery view and to come on video because it's an interactive conversation, and sometimes we'll be having like real live conversation together, and sometimes our body language is part of the conversation. And so I just invite you to give yourself this whole hour to come into a topic that we don't often get to speak about. And what I understand about storytelling is that our very first role as a storyteller, the very first one, the storytelling gig is like the biggest magic act of all times. It's all illusion, but not in the way that we often think of it. Because the first true step of every storyteller is listening. It's listening. It's being a deep, profound listener and observer of the world that you live in, and understanding what is asking to be reflected back, what is asking to be infused into the times that you're living with, and how do you give your precious life, your precious voice, the resonance of your heartbeat to these times through the stories that you choose to carry, or the stories that you choose to put down, or the stories that you choose to amplify, or the stories that you heal. And so today we're going to commit our next hour of our lives together into this grand conversation of what does it mean to be a storyteller in our time, but not just any old storyteller. What does it mean to be a sacred storyteller? And what does it mean to be a conscious creator? And we're looking at this all specifically today through a lens that I don't get to talk enough about, but is truly like my greatest passion right now, is really working with story as a form of initiation. So just welcoming all of y'all that have come on. Hello, Eleanor and Sarah and Shauna and Liz and Emily. And oh my gosh, I hope I correctly say your name. Sadhana. Gosh, it's like the rhythm of that. Brianna, Lana, Delia. It's always a bold thing to say people's names without knowing correctly how to say them. Rachel, Shannon. It's welcome. Welcome to all of you. One of my first teachers, Joe Lambert, said he never would tell a story in the room unless he knew everyone's name. And so we have to be a little bit tending to the time, but just really wanting to honor that. So I'm going to start off with a quote. And this quote, some of you have heard it many times, and I've probably read it 100 times, if not more, and it feels relevant every single time. This comes from Rebecca Solnit. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to love or hate, to see or be seen. And often, too often, stories will saddle us and they'll ride us and they'll whip us onward and they'll tell us what to do. And we'll do it without questioning. This is where I have to pause just because Rebecca uses the language of we. And what I've been taught through some of my elders is that we don't ever use the language of we, because there is no, in this way, like I have no idea what your backgrounds are, what your experience is. There is no we among us without that kind of shared experience. For all I know, you very well know about your relationship to story. So I like just to take a moment to honor that aspect. But the task of learning to be free requires learning to hear those stories, to question those stories, to pause and hear silence, to name those stories, and then become a storyteller. So today we're going to come to the threshold of working with story as a sacred art form, as a healing art form, but we're specifically looking at it through the lens of one of the absolute key aspects of initiation. And so we're going to be focusing more on initiation than I normally do in this class, but let us begin with some of the most basic aspects of the power of our language and the power of what it is to be a storyteller. So the Hawaiians believe that words are so powerful that they can raise enough energy to quicken the world or to slow it down. And if you ever want to get to see a culture that's still intact with their relationship to their power of language, their capacity to call the rain, where those old stories haven't become fictionalized, they're still close in, go and witness hula, like real hula, not entertainment hula, but true hula. It's an embodied prayer. Sicilians say that words are so powerful they poke holes in the universe. I always think about that because, you know, when your temper starts to get big and large, that whatever is said can't ever be taken back. There's actually a word in physics that speaks to that aspect, that once a word has been spoken in a specific place, it lives there forever. The Maori say that words don't describe a thing, that they are a thing. And in Japan, they have a word called kotodama, and it refers to the word spirit. It refers to the spirit and the life of a word before it's even come into our consciousness, before it's even come out of our mouth. And then there's abracadabra, one of the oldest words on the planet, truly. Great argument about who truly owns the origin of that word. I create as I speak. So all of the ancient religions have an agreement. They all agree that our world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. I like to say that again just because it's kind of like one of those ricocheting moments, like when I first took that into my body, you know, all these questions about what are we doing here? What's my life purpose? Do humans belong here? You know, and then you come back to this one simple ancient teaching from every ancient culture, that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence, and our unique role in doing that. And let us humble ourselves, because it is an aspect of our human role that we are speaking our world into existence. Like the first airplane couldn't have been until someone imagined it. I love that we still don't know where the imagination comes from, right? Talk about the last frontier. We don't know where it comes from, but you know, it was imagined, it was inspired by nature. You know, someone thought it up, they spoke with it with a certain resonance and power of the heart and passion and belief that others believed it too. And then it was, and then we shaped matter. We literally changed the shape of matter to create what was in our imagination, and change the shape and direction of the world. I mean, it's incredible. But then, like, let us humble ourselves a little bit, because it's not as if we were the only ones who are singing, speaking, and chanting the world into existence. The whales are too, and so are the birds, and so is the wind as it rustles through the leaves. So it's this massive collaboration of an extraordinary symphony of co-creation that we're all part of. And I would take a stand that it's really, really, like, if there's one thing that has been hidden away from humans, is our value of the part that we play in that ancient wisdom, that ancient teaching. So welcome to all of you. For all those of you who just joined, I invited everyone to place yourselves fully on video and to put us in gallery view so we can see our collective group that is coming together today, because it's just a gift to get to see what other people are wandering down this journey path with you. And a little bit about me. I'm just going to take I got so bored with telling this part because I'm actually really enjoy listening to other people's stories and my own. But I'll tell you a little bit about what brought me to here today. And it really started on a farm in Vermont. I grew up at a time when you know, kids were allowed to wander, you know, and it was a different time. And so I was allowed to have a lot of time in the out of doors. And in that time, I really had a lot of time to become one with my imagination, and to really develop a relationship with nature and outside, and to feel really comfortable there. And I came to story really because through that imagination, but also I learned story as as a guide, as a savior, as an ally, because part of my childhood also involved moving around quite a lot. And if any of you have moved around and gone from different schools, you just know what it's like, and you know what kids are like, and you know that stories can be the great escape. And they can also be incredible allies, and they can be your friends when you don't know how to be a friend. And that's really when I fell in love with story. It was at that point of great escape. But I began to learn the power of storytelling and the responsibility of storytelling when I was 16 and my best friend committed suicide. And because books and writing had always been my ally, when I was in that place of deep confusion and grief and just heartbreak, I went to that one place that was always that place of sanctuary, which was writing. And I wrote my way through the grief and through trying to make sense of it. And that play was actually won a spot in a young playwriting festival. So I got to see the story on stage. And that's when I learned the responsibility of storytelling, that what you put out into the world comes back. Because while I was trying to transfer and alchemize and live through my grief, then I became responsible to being witness to and hearing the grief of others. As I shared my story, they shared theirs. I began to learn the business of storytelling when I went straight from high school to New York City to study acting. And I got to study with one of the greats in the very last class, Sandy Meisner, at the Neighborhood Playhouse. And I learned something. I learned that I absolutely loved that world. I learned that there was an incredible power that happened in that space, like true magic. And I also learned that I didn't want to spend my life speaking other people's words. And I'm so grateful that I got to learn that at a very young age. And so then I went off and I went to college. I worked off Broadway for a little bit. I had an amazing experience of working with professional actors, of really understanding the business of it all. I worked at Williamstown Theater Festival. And then I ended up going and getting I got an undergraduate degree in outdoor experiential education. I wanted to go live life and got to go back to the nature and back to the wilderness. And that's where I really began to learn about storytelling. Because while we'd go on these wilderness trips, we'd also sit around the fire. And, I don't know where you guys live, but I spent the last 13 years in San Francisco, and that culture is very information based. It's hungry for information. So the kind of conversation is you begin to say something and then someone asks for information. They ask for information. They want to know the details, want to know the details. And at that time in my life, when we sat around the fire, there's a culture that happens there that when you open your mouth to speak, others assume that you have something to say and they listen. And that's where I began to understand story as initiation in the way that I'm going to bring it to you. It's about as honestly as I can, because there we were going into these great wilderness adventures, having run-ins with bears, being chased by moose, working with youth at risk and having all kinds of things happen. And we would come together and we would share our stories and people would listen. And there was something about understanding that there's a way to tell a story where it's not just about information. It's really about making meaning of your life and making meaning of understanding like what you have to give, like that you're not going to keep it all to yourself, that it's so good. It's so good that it's worth the breath of your life and the ear of others to give away. I ended up getting a master's in social work after working again with youth at risk in the wilderness and really having that, and really came to this place of, as I love the environment so much, I wanted to be a protector of it. And I understood that if we can't help ourselves, we can't help the planet. It was just that simple. Like if I was going to help the earth, it was going to be with people. Long story short, I met one of my first massive initiations was around getting thyroid cancer. It's a whole other story that I think some of you have heard before. I'm not going to repeat it today. And it really gave me that moment of coming to, I don't know, I don't usually use this word, God's truth, around the alignment of my soul. And I was out of alignment. I was acting out of fear. I was acting out of what I thought I was supposed to do. I was acting out of what, creating what would a secure life path look like. And I was completely running away from the fear of what if I actually did my truest passion, which is where my genius lived, which was in writing and storytelling and theater and all these different ways. And I was looking for the way to weave it all together. My love of nature, my love of story, my love of working with people. And it's like, it seemed like an impossible path to try to weave. I ended up working with Al Gore, and I produced the Green Channel at his television network, and I got to work inside the beast of the media machine. And I got to really see how that works and how does communication work. And that's a whole other story that I'm not going to get into. But at the end of it all, I sat at the edge of a cliff with the biggest prayer. And I was at that time in my life when it was like it was going to be time to weave the threads together. How was I going to weave those threads together? And I sat with that prayer, and I thought I was going to come up with a business, because doesn't everyone think you're going to have I'm good Capricorn. We think we're supposed to be entrepreneurial, and I was going to create some sustainable business. And I asked, like, it was a desperate prayer. It was a committed prayer. It was just, show me the way, and can it please be fun? I'm pretty sure I asked for that. I was like, I really want to do what I'm supposed to do, and it would be great if it was fun. And I kid you not, the story came rumbling through the universe. Whales started singing to me from the forest. I used to tell people I thought I heard a whale singing through the forest, but then I realized I had to get honest, because we all have these moments where the thresholds of life open. And if we don't tell each other about them, then they're easy to miss when they happen, because they happen very quickly. And I really was walking through a forest, and I heard a whale sing. And I knew that there was something for me to capture. So I went back, and no business for me, just a really big story. And I've spent about 12 years of my life committed to learning how to tell that story through a 5-book series and through many different forms. And that being with that story is really my first master teacher, like my true master teacher on storytelling. This is where I want to confess the truth of it, because I have sat with some incredible, masterful teachers in the human form, such as Michael Mead and Carolyn Casey and Stephen Jenkins, and so many just incredible people. And part of my truth, in terms of where some of my deepest in my bones knowledge comes from, has also been sitting with the trees and sitting with the ocean and sitting in the forest and coming to that deep place of listening and finding those pieces inside myself that then resonate when I start reading from all the masters. So it's a little bit of my story and what brings me to you today. And that ended up leading to creating the School for Sacred Storytelling, and came for this real passion for bringing alive, to me, I think one of the most powerful tools of our time, which was this tool that he keeps us into relationship of how to be human. It feels like so much of our life is yanking us away from how to be human together. That technology can be used as a tool, or it can be divisive. And that when it comes down to it, when we come into relationship with storytelling, it teaches us every single skill we need to be great humans. And so that's what we're going to dive into a little bit more today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what is a story. I'm going to talk a lot about what is initiation. And we're going to talk more about like the path of initiation, and where is that happening in kind of very invisible ways in our lives. And then at the end of our time, I'll stay on for a couple of extra minutes, and I'll talk about ways that you can play in stories initiations. That's where we're headed. So let's get into it. What's a story? I'm sure you guys know, but let's get it on the same page. What is a story? And you can say it out loud. You can write it in the chat box, however you want to be with it. What is it? What is a story?
Well, it's something that has a beginning and an end.
Right. And there's a middle somewhere between there. It's a journey.
The interest. The interest.
Right. So, it's not facts and information. I have a very dear human in my life, and every day, at the end of the day, I say, well, what'd you do today? And he literally, it's like a laundry list. He just goes through and tells me every single thing he did. And that's a lot of information. But a story is more than that. A story takes you on a journey. If I'm going to tell you I went to the post office, But if I tell you, I went to the post office and you would not believe who was standing in front of me in line. She looked very normal. She had this little brown coat on, but underneath her coat, there was slipping out this little purple wing. It was iridescent. And I swear to you, the more I stared at that iridescent wing, the more it began to flutter and flutter and flutter until obviously there were two huge wings that were being hidden underneath her coat while I was in line at the post office. Okay, so how many of you saw that image? Okay, so here's what we did. Thank you to Zoom. I mean, Zoom was with us, but we didn't need Zoom for this. We were using some of the most ancient technology known to man, what I call absolute magic. You know, we just reality bended together. We location traveled together. We shared a common experience together, all while sitting in the same room. And it's kind of magical, right? It's like we didn't have to put on any like headsets or anything like that. And what I'm calling magic, Princeton calls neural coupling. So one of the things that happened is that as I created that image in my mind, my front lobe began to get really active and I began to see it. And it was like, deet, 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 deet. But at the exact same moment, your front lobe began to get activated as well. And as you began to create the images, it's kind of this amazing thing. And it also speaks to the power of storytellers. We can plant images, we can plant realities in other people's minds. That's how powerful we are. But again, like I said, storytelling is always an illusionary magic trick. You think that the storytellers hold the power, but they don't. They don't. They only have half of it. Because unless you're there, the garden of your imagination, you get to choose which images and which stories you're going to carry or not. And that's where the true power lives. It's in the connection. So it's quite a responsibility to decide what stories you're going to carry at this time. Okay, what else? Melina, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, is saying it's a series of present moments. It's a series of moments, present moments. Yes. So when I first started going off into teaching about storytelling and I was trying to figure out how do we break it down to very basic terms, I said it's an operating system. Stories are an operating system, and they teach us our values, our belief systems, and what we believe is possible. They affect what we can imagine into the future. We affect what roles we think that we should and can play. They affect our values and our morals. And they're often how we come into the world. Think about kids. And oh gosh, you know, how many of you have gotten to read the same freaking book 30 times to a little child as they want that story over and over and over again? Because what are we doing? We're creating that system, our system within our brain that helps us understand the world. And I was on a walk through Topanga Canyon, which is where I live, and I swear to God, the trees were like, Leah, enough with that already. That is the most grotesque definition of a story that you could possibly come up with. Can't you just tell the truth that it's a library of our soul? That stories are a library of our soul. So I have to give the trees full credit for that poetry. But it is, when a story, it's like, you know, history is complicated and I'm not going to get into it, but it's like, it is worthy to hear the stories of another time and not try to change them according to our present times, because they are windows into understanding who we were back then. And the stories as they continue are absolute part of our evolution as humans. It's how we learn to evolve, through learning through other people's stories. So they're really something, these wild, amazing things. Oh gosh, is anyone else hearing distorted video? No. Sorry, Thea. Okay, so we have an idea about what a story is, but what is a sacred story? What is what defines it? What distinguishes it as a sacred story? So when we use that word sacred, I'm gonna jump in. Normally I'm a little bit more patient, but there's some good stuff I want to get to, but we can't get to it before we get to these little building blocks, right? So a sacred story, it's that, right? It talks about spirituality. Let's go to the word spirit. Okay, so a story, when we call it sacred, we're saying, I see the life in you. I see the divinity in you. That's what we're saying when we call something sacred, right? I can say, oh, look at this plastic bottle. What if I were to treat you as sacred and honor you for where you came from and the oil that was pulled out of the earth so that you could take form. What if I could honor you as a sacred vessel, not as something hated and evil for what you're doing to our oceans, but oh my gosh, a sacred vessel of life, for carrying water to me in this place where I can't drink water out of the faucets. And then how would I treat this differently if I honor this as sacred? We can do this with everything, and it's a form of animism, that expression of being with things, and it's a form of storytelling, and it's a form of seeing the life in all beings. So when we say that, okay, I see the life in a story, it's a sacred story. Now I'm saying, okay, I see the life, the spirit that lives inside that story. So when I hear a sacred story, I feel the life inside of it, and a life that is here serving life. That means that when I hear a sacred story, I feel more engaged, more alive, more oftentimes inspired. I often want to work out the next day, quit sugar, stop caffeine. It's like the best part wants to be called out in me because something that's in service of my life is being shared. And so this can come through great comedians, this can come through incredible music, but this can come through very challenging stories that will take you to the hardest places to see where humans have gone terribly wrong, but they guide you out into a whole nother way of seeing the world and the possibility of you living in it in another way. Okay, so let's not think that sacred stories are fluffy, oh, I'm not going to have to face anything that's bad or scary or hard to look at. No, sacred stories, when we look at the Welsh word of storyteller and the etymology of it, it goes back to a guide through the worlds, a guide through the dimensions. So it can be a holy act to share a sacred story, and a lot of almost every religion believes that here's this body, right, made of blood and bone, and an exact replica of water to earth as the land is. I didn't say that right. But we have the same amount of body in our water, the same amount of water in our body as the earth has water on her planet. It's kind of amazing that we're like this little amazing replicas and walking on earth. And so we have this material body, and our soul lives inside our body, right? So that's a commonly understood principle, right? Maybe you don't believe it, but we're going to go in this as if. And so when I look at a sacred story, I look at, okay, if story is the vehicle, then the spirit can live inside the story. So the story is a vehicle for the spirit. And you can hear that, right? You can hear 10 people tell the same story in 10 different ways. And they're carrying different intentions. They're carrying different ways of sharing it, different purposes, and a different spirit that lives through each of them. So when I look at sacred storytelling, I look at it as a holy act of communion with the unseen world, and with and I don't even like to use the word audience, I like to use the word participants, co-creators, because that's what we're doing here. We're co-creating realities together. And so it's this act of communion with spirit, communion with self, communion with intention, communion with you. And that's what's beginning to happen in that space. So it's a little bit about, okay, here we are. And I'm seeing Sarah saying that sacred storytelling is when the story presents meaning for both you and your community, right? And it's such an amazing thing, because the one thing I know about stories is that they're wily little tricksters. I have told the same story 30 times, and on the 31st time I heard something different. I learned something from the story. And then different people will call out different aspects of the story based on what they're needing, what they're wanting, what they're ready to hear. So it is an act of aliveness. So I want to get into, I'm going to do a little bit of a show and tell with you guys. I'm going to share my screen. I don't always do this, but why not today get technical in our expression of story? Okay, so we talked about what it is, and now let's just talk about why it's so powerful and why it's something to be in such conscious relationship with. Because as I understand story, It really teaches us how to go through the different aspects of what it is to be, to grow up through life. And so the alchemy of story, it brings us into connection with each other, which we also told, when I said that stories are wily beings, it's like I did this the other day. I saw, it was actually a year ago. I saw Wonder Woman with a dear friend of mine, and I speak in story, and so to speak in story, it's like, I think about this. You go to Italy, you learn Italian. You go to Ecuador, you learn Spanish. You go to the land of story, you learn the language of story, which is symbol, metaphor, myth, archetype. Those are the that's the language of story. And so if you don't speak the language of story, it's sort of like, when you go to somewhere else and you don't speak the language, you can catch bits and fragments of it, but you're not going to get the whole meaning. So I was watching this movie with a dear friend of mine, and I'm seeing all the symbolism and all the metaphor and all this, and she's taking it for every literal thing that it's saying, and that's where it stopped for her. And so we experienced two different stories watching the same thing sitting side by side. So it's an amazing experience because it can bring us into a shared experience. And so we will only see it through the lens, through our own truth. And this is a great thing for us to be playing with, because truth, I think, is a very naughty word. I don't like to use it because it's a carpentry term. And it means a straight line from here to there. So we can all be looking at the same thing and speaking our truth, and our truth will be accurate. We're saying what we're seeing. But it doesn't mean that it's the wholeness of the experience. This is where I love storytelling, because storytelling gives us an opportunity to come into a wholeness of an experience where you don't ever have to get locked into just one perspective or just one truth. So it brings us into connection, and it gives us the opportunity to hear and learn different perspectives. I'll talk a little bit about that. Okay. It also gives us an opportunity to step onto the path of eldership. I'm going to talk a lot about that in just a minute, so I'm going to skip right on over that. It gives us an aspect of belonging. So many times I think of so many things that we're trained not to talk about or not to share. I think of, well, I don't know about you, but when I started hearing all those stories coming out of the Me Too movement, and so many of them were repetitive, so many of them were the same story being told by so many different women. And I thought, as a storyteller, wow, what would have happened had more women told their stories, so that other women, when they had those experiences, would have a leg to stand on or a shoulder to stand on, the capacity to understand like what is considered acceptable and what is not. But when we don't share our stories, then our evolution of consciousness doesn't get to continue. So it's a very amazing aspect of, and there's a responsibility. It's strange. There's a responsibility with sharing your stories. And it can create extraordinary senses of belongings, where you all of a sudden understand that you are not alone in your experience. It can provide extraordinary aspects of healing. And that's one of the things I specialize in, is working with story as a healing modality. And there are times when something very big and traumatic happens in our life, and we're in a moment, and it needs to be witnessed, it needs to be held. And that's a very certain kind of moment in our lives, as we call in healing story circles. And we say, please don't question this. Please don't try to get more information. I'm asking just to be witnessed and listened to. And we understood the power of that. We saw that through the apartheid movement. That's one of the things that they did. They created space for people to be listened to. There's also another moment in the evolution when you come to this place where you don't just need to be witnessed, where you're alchemizing, now you're transforming the experience, where you're mining into it, into the depths, for the power of it, for what it brought alive in you, for what strengths it emerged. And in those cases, we can take our stories and we can transform them into wisdom stories. We can transform them into teaching stories. We'll talk a little bit about that. This is some of the most generous storytelling I know of. So you're not just talking about, oh, look, I'm so great, and look at me on my Instagram and how wonderful everything is. You're like, no, I'm really human, and I may learn something along the way, and I want to make sure you don't have to learn the same thing in the same way. Go learn your own lessons. Let's keep sharing these together. They build bridges. There's amazing research that talked about the power of storytelling in terms of building acceptance of those who are other or different. And in this case, they focused on people that had different sexual orientations. They took a group that identified themselves as saying that they were only open to one kind of sexual identity. They showed them TV shows where they got to see the lives experienced through people that had different identities other than their own, and through that form of storytelling became more accepting of people that they weren't before. And it wasn't this kind of you should do this or you should be this or you should have this open mind, blah blah blah. It was literally just through the sharing of stories. And I really believe that every act of storytelling is an act of love. Every time I get on the stage, every time I tell a story, it is an act of devotion and love. And it's one of the most incredible things that I know to do, to also be in that frequency of love. So that's a little bit about what that is. So now I want to take us into the realm of, okay, storytelling and what is it in terms of the web of relationships. So it's a relationship to the self. You are this tool, you're this vehicle for the story to live through you. You know, you can be considered even a channel, but then you're in relationship to the story itself. Then you're in relationship to your audience. What are they needing? Are they with you? Are they in communion? Have you lost them? You know, so it's like this is also you're so it's like you are a very multidimensional, multitasking being, because you're tracking and weaving together all these aspects. You're also in relationships, the times you're living in. What's a story that needs to be told in this time? What's a story that's appropriate? What's needed? You know, and then you're in relationship to the space you were telling in. One of the greatest mistakes that I've seen storytellers make is not to be in relationship with the space in real time. You know, and it can be happening. You know, I was somewhere and the horn started honking outside the theater, and it's honking. Look, I can ignore it, but we all are sitting there and it's pulling us out of this shared reality, right? We're in this shared dream reality. And so you have to weave it in to your experience. Okay, how can you weave in the honking into some way where you're all in this, yes, that's happening here. Okay, so I want to talk about stories specifically in relationship as a rites of passage and as a form of initiation. And what I would say is that this is one of the things that is being very, very much lost in our times. And it's something that is, in my own evolution as someone that works with storytelling as a modality for healing, for transformation, for alchemy, for how do we meet the times that we're in. This aspect of working with story and bringing it back as being a key role to our initiations is the thing that I'm most passionate about right now. And so some of you know about initiations. We're going to get to talk a little bit about this, but some of us know as initiations, it's like, we know often it happened, when we think of that word, oftentimes in ancient cultures it happened when the young girl or young boy turned 13. And one aspect was that there was a separation from community. Something changed inside of them. And then there was a return to community. And then when we talk about this symbolic change, I would say that, one of the key aspects of initiation is having to face fear. And I would almost change that language to getting the experience of facing fear on your own so that you know that you can. And I would say that this is an initiation that many of us are being robbed of. So what's the purpose of initiations? It's like you know of them, right? It's like they mark entrances. They often mark formal admissions, entrances into adulthood. They might be a place where you are reborn into another role. So some of the classic ones, when people get married, when they become mothers or fathers, when they graduate with a master's degree, these are all aspects of initiation. Langston, who was one of our guest teachers, shared something that has stayed with me so long, and it just kind of blew my mind at the time, was that in his tradition, in the African tradition, when the youngster went through their initiation, their parents were in sense taken away. Their parents were no longer the guardians or responsible for their life or their livelihood. They were done. Their parents graduated. They became fellow members of their community, and the earth became their mother. The earth became their father. And they had to go to the earth to source their as their source of all the things. And I can't speak any more than I can, because obviously it's not something that, it's not from my tradition. But in terms of, like, to me, a paradigm shift of what can happen in an initiation, and to put it very simply, one of the purpose of initiations is you get to learn what you're made of. Anyone that's gone through a doctorate, I mean, it's like, sounds like torture. They really learn what they're made of. So, a couple of aspects of initiation, and these are really important. Survival is not guaranteed. There is no guarantee that you will make it through an initiation alive or with all your pieces put together. And so I often think of this like, one initiation that many people go through and they don't make it out alive is falling in love. How many people do you know in our modern day world who fell in love, had their heart broken to smithereens, and weren't held in community or by wisdom or by wise ones, and didn't understand that that's an initiation of life, that life will break your heart open. A friend of mine said that, break your heart open rather than just break your heart, over and over and over again. And that learning to recover that whilst continuing to be bold enough to know that it's going to happen again. And some of people that haven't made it through. They had their heart broken and they never were able to love again. But there's marriage. Marriage is an initiation. Birth is an initiation where there's no guarantees. Parenthood is initiation, no guarantees. So one of the things that we know about initiations is that something will be lost. Something will be taken or surrendered. It could be a loss of innocence. In my case, it was a body part. I had my thyroid taken out, changed my life. But something in the process of the initiation, this is where I really want to get into this, something in the process of it where something is gained. Something is gained. And if we don't get to see our lives through the lens of initiation, which our world is not doing very well right now, if we don't get the goods, we get the suffering, we get the pain, we get all of that, but we might not get the strength, we might not get full access to our power, we might not get full access to our tools, we might not get to be witnessed by our community as being very changed and different from the situation. So we might not get to carry that aspect of growing up, of going through different stages of life. And we're seeing that through an entire generation right now that didn't get those initiations. And now it's like we need these people to act like elders, not just olders, right? So I know some 18-year-olds who are more elders than olders, because they're committed to this path. So one of the most key parts is returning to your community and being able to tell the story and to be witnessed as being changed. You are not the person you were when this started. So, oops, I'm going to stop sharing right now. We can come back to that. I want to talk a little bit about like some of the mysterious aspects of initiations and what you're seeing. So, what I feel like in our times, there are a lot of initiations that are happening, like many, many, many initiations that are happening that were not necessarily being marked in this traditional way. COVID was a massive initiation. People going through massive health crises, massive initiation. Climate crisis, people having to move is an initiation. And I was just curious in your life experiences, if you're seeing any other initiations that you're either experiencing that you feel like deserve to be named and recognized. One of the ones that I really saw was a woman coming out as a solo entrepreneur, where you're saying, I have value for being, and it's going to sound funny, I feel like I'm aging myself, but it's still even present. I was still raised where there was a massive transition happening about the roles of women in society, but still underneath it all, the message got through that women are valued for being a sexual object, for being a homemaker, for being a mother. And now there's this whole group of women and men who are coming out and saying, women are saying, I actually have a value other than that deserves to be compensated for. So people are coming out with these other jobs. That is an initiation, claiming a new role that's not been named. Men who are coming out and saying, I'm not going to take just any job because my role is supposed to be a provider at all costs to my soul. That is an initiation that's going unspoken and under recognized. So, gosh, oh wow, look at these. Melina's saying that burnout. Wow, that is an initiation. I know that one. Right. And the healing that's involved, and then the boundaries that you get to learn in that experience. I mean, gosh, all the things that you get to learn from a good burnout, and hopefully apply so you don't ever have to go back and do it again. War, absolutely. Absolutely. That is an initiation. Yeah, fake news. Isn't that an initiation that we're all going through together? How do we know what's real? How do we sit with people who hold different belief systems and see the world completely differently and maintain our humanity? Wow, are we being initiated into a whole new world order that no other humans had to go through before? Right, challenging capitalism, right, challenging the systems of our time. That's a huge initiation that we're going through. Dawn is saying making very different choices in a physical death. Absolutely. Absolutely. And Lori, right, the anti-racism, right, this claiming this, it's like it really feels like this is a fun one. And Michael Mead is responsible for really bringing this out into the public and seeing this apocalypse. This word has been hijacked, and Stephen Jenkinson, who's one of my absolute mentors, talks about, he's like, I trust stories. I don't trust storytellers. He's like, I always believe in words. And it's always worthwhile going back to the etymology and the origin of words because they're the original coding, words, world, they're the codes that our world is made out of. And when you go back to the origin of them, will often reveal the original aspect, the original essence of the meaning. So many of our words have been hijacked, but to mean something that they aren't. So apocalypse, we're saying, oh my God, we're living in apocalyptic times, which in many means the end times, right? It's the end of the world as we know it. Right, it's the end of the world as we know it. It's this pulling back. It literally means to pull back the I can't think of the word. It's like that Wizard of Oz moment. It's pulling back the veils and seeing what's been there the whole time. That's what apocalypse means. It's a pulling back of the veils. It's about seeing what's actually there. And so, yeah, it's been, I don't know about you guys. I was raised in the 80s. God, 80s was so much fun, so much fantasy. It was all fantasy. It was great. And then to have this like coming of age where it pulled back the veils, we're like, oh, that is not real. And then the consequence of saying what has this world been on that I've been standing on? What are the stories that are real and what is not? And how has that affected my life and the choices that I have made? This is really a reckoning in a way that I don't know that any other group has had to reckon with this on this level in a global way. It's an incredible time to get to be a storyteller. Because when you get to be a storyteller in our time, it's like, to me, it's the key of liberation. It gives you access to live through the stories in so many ways. And when you look at this as initiatory times, look, we all know that if we really look at the science of climate change, we understand that there's going to be some big changes that are happening, and that most likely they could be uncomfortable, whatever uncomfortable means. So that when you look at that, you're like, safety, security. Oh my gosh, it's a very scary story to be in. But when you look through it, the lens through initiation, you're like, oh, we are in changing times, and that there can be comfort taken in your strength, and that when you understand what you're made of, and when you meet the challenges of our times, and you face your fears. Here's what I know about fear: you run from it, it's like a dangerous dog; it chases you, right? Then you just keep going on the run. It keeps chasing you. But when you stand and face fear, courage will be at your side. Bravery has your back. Wisdom is just waiting for you, to meet it on the other side. You have a completely different lived experience. And this is all through, okay, wow, okay. It's like one of my favorite tricks, as a storyteller. There are going to be those people that are just going to drive you a little crazy, and they're going to create some challenge and some strife and some upset in your life. Maybe it's a boss, maybe it's an ex, maybe it's a neighbor, and they've got you at your core. And all the spinning, all the anger, all the resentment, right? My favorite trick, when you look at this, okay, I'm in an initiation, right? I can play the role of the victim. Oh, they're doing this to me, and how could they do this to me? And blah 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 blah. And I live in the United States. And the United States loves to create. We herald our victim culture, right? We've created an entire judicial system based on heralding, the victim culture. We've created an entire system that wants us to believe that we're victims and that we have no true self-determination over our lives. It's pretty intense. But when you flip the switch and you play, I like it like a sumo wrestler move, and you're like, oh, I'm not the victim. I'm the hero of the story. And all of a sudden that person is not the villain. Oh no, no. They are my master teacher. Oh, and they've come in service to my soul to give me a lesson that no one has dared to offer me. And they're going to take me to the core of my being, and we're going to wrestle it. We're going to wrestle. They're going to make me so much stronger because we're going to go in for the fight of a lifetime. And you start thinking about like Star Wars and Luke Skywalker when he's learning how to do his Jedi thing, right? It's like it's hard work. You got to work out. You got to be strong. You got to eat well. You got to have real self-determination. You have to have discipline over your mind. It's warrior times. And we can do this simply through, it's like we don't have those kinds of physical expressions in many of our lives. Not that we can't create them, because we can, you know. But part of it is how we live through the times, and how we live through the stories of our times, and how we tell the stories of our times. And that is like the business of initiations. Any other thoughts that people have at this moment in time? Oops. Okay. So that's pretty much the conversation of our class today. Is really getting to have this opportunity of re-examining our life as sacred storytellers, as conscious creators, as really looking for what are the initiations. And what I understand about initiations is like sometimes we get to choose them. God, master's degree was an initiation for me. Whoa. Getting married, that's an initiation. Having children, that's an initiation. These are often things, starting new jobs where we're called to be different parts of ourselves. Those are all initiations. Oftentimes we choose those. But then there are the initiations that choose us. Having a massive health crisis, having a fire. Think of all the people in Southern California, Northern California, that massive communities have gone through these huge initiations together. Emily's saying, just the word initiation, and the title of the class is powerful. Oh, thank you. Right. Marlena's reminded that initiation is temporary. Thank you for presencing that, right? We don't have to, it's not, they're designed to be thresholds, they're designed to be doorways. So it's like we're not meant to live through them all the time. And that's also like a really great thing to remember when you're going through one, where you're like, oh man, this really sucks, and I'm so angry, and I'm so upset, and I'm so scared, and I'm so all of this. And there's something beautiful when you're in the initiation to be like, if you're doing like a solo wilderness trip and it's 3 days, you're like, okay, it's only 3 days of my life. If you're going through the initiation, but there's a key aspect to initiations, and that there is mystery in them. You never know. You never know exactly how long they're going to last. The initiation of grieving, gosh, there's no guarantee how long that's going to last. So, yes, there will be a recording to this class. So, what I can be curious about in transformation will rise. Right. You can be like, initiations give you opportunity to be humble. We don't know anything when we're going through initiation. That's the scary part of mysteries. It's this humbling time of getting down on your hands and your knees and saying, wow, I really don't know. I don't know how I'm going to make it through this. And it's this time of deep, deep soul searching. And it is that dark night of the soul. And those can be really scary, frightening times to go through. And you want allies with you. You should never have to go through those by yourself. So if there's nothing else I can leave you with today, it's like we'll all go through them in our lives, but to always know that you should never have to go through those by yourselves. And sometimes our best friends are the ones that will get us through, and sometimes it's these mysterious people who show up as these magical beings and that perfect moment. And so again, it's that humbling moment of you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what you do know. And like, how do you be so alive in the teaching that will only come through this unique doorway and threshold of this particular moment? And what we do is when we come out to tell the story of them, that's when we get to glean all the sense making. That's when we get to glean all the meaning making. So one of my stories is when I went through thyroid cancer. One of the greatest allies that I had, I had good people at my side, but one of the truest, greatest allies that I had was a spiral garden that my friends helped me build when I didn't have the energy to do it myself. And I walked that garden every single day. And so where I learned how to pray. I didn't know how to pray. That land taught me how to pray. I was so humbled by life that I was open to listen. And when the land spoke, I heard it. And it taught me about gratitude. I didn't know anything about gratitude, nothing. And that land taught me about gratitude and how to speak my gratitude every day. And so when it's like at the moment, had you been able to ask me what it was like, I would have told you I was all alone. Right? But when we come out, as we look through the lens of initiation, and we really get to grok what happened and what was there, it's through the telling of the story, it's through the listening for the greater story, the story of our soul, and of that universal experience that all humans are going through together, are the initiations of our time. And so, Dawn, I can't speak about that because I don't have any experience with it. And so I don't feel like I'd be in the right way about it. The only thing I could speak to is listening to one's heart. And that's about it. Okay, so I'm going to, if you came for a story and initiation and a little bit of wonderings about that, we are done. If you're curious about some opportunities, including a storytelling ceremony, including a retreat that's coming up, and a 4-week storytelling class, I'm going to take about 8 minutes and tell you guys about that. And that will be the end of our time. And I'll finish off with a great quote, because you always have to finish with a great quote. And why do I start every class with a beginning and ending with a quote? It's sort of like my Tai Chi teacher. At the end of every class, we always bowed to him. And he always reminded us, you're not bowing to me, you're bowing to my teacher and my teacher's teacher and my teacher's teacher's teacher. And so I always repeat the great words of those who've been bold and daring to care and tend to the words of our time and to share them, so that we begin and end every class with those. So I'm going to give you some links because email is tricky and it doesn't always like to get through these days. So what's happening this week, it starts on Wednesday. If you want to play and take your hand at creating a teaching story, this is one of my favorite classes. And we're going to meet for 4 weeks. We meet Wednesday of this week, and then three Tuesdays after that. And you're going to have an opportunity to learn about yes, thank you, Rachel, 2 different kinds of teaching stories. One is designed for youth, for young people. So it's almost an art form of creating these moral stories, these value stories for young people, where there's something that you really want to make sure that this next generation gets to have. Maybe it's your value around the environment, or maybe it's your value of kindness, or how to be honest, or how to do these things. And this is an opportunity to be fun and playful and creative, and work through fairy tales. Also, there's the initiations of our time, the teaching stories of adults. And there are those times when we really mess up. I don't know about you, I've messed up a couple of times. And I like to call it not messing up. I've come to, at this point in my life, I like to call them missteps. because I'm devoted into being in alignment, and it always feels good when I'm in alignment. And I get to learn a lot when I go out of alignment. So if I go down the shame spiral, like, oh man, I can't believe I did that again. It's so bad. That's so wrong. We know that takes us nowhere, right? It's just like energy spinning out off into the blah, blah, blah. But if I can take that energy and bring it back into alignment and be like, wow, I learned something again. And my soul must be really committed to this lesson because it keeps coming around and around and around. So why don't I learn it this time? And so that I find that a really great time to just like pause, hit the pause button and write a teaching story. And you really get to, it's not being about being ashamed, it's about being so generous that you have something to teach another person. You're like, gosh, don't go through this one. Look at all the things I learned. So when this moment in life meets you, you don't have to repeat it. You can go on to make up your own different things that you can create your own next story about. So I also feel like it's part of the evolution of life. And so I put the link in there if you want to jump into that class. We're also going to have a very special guest teacher, Joshua Townsend. He's one of my acting guides and teachers in LA, and really a unique, amazing coach. And so for those who are in the class and for those who want to learn about some more performative skills, he'll be coming in and you'll have an opportunity to share a few moments of your story, and he'll give you some great, powerful coaching. And it's a fun way to really develop your creation story skills and also your performance story skills. So you don't have to know what you're going to tell coming in. I always find it better if you don't. Sometimes you do, but you don't, because we're part of the process, and the pleasure is in discovering it. And we'll do that. So yes, the link will be mailed out by tomorrow. So that is happening. So that's a 4-week class. Dip your toes in. It's great. It's going to carry you straight through the end of the year. You're end of the year feeling great. It's just fun. Then, if you're like, whoa, this whole initiation story experience, I want to go deep. I actually want an initiatory experience. There's something in my life has happened and it's not being recognized. There was no ceremony, there was no ritual. I have not gotten to fully claim or grok all of the power and the potency of it. So this is going to be designed for a very small group. There's only going to be 13 of us in this course. We're going to meet once in December, once in January, once in February online. And then in March, in the equinox, we're going to meet for an in-person 5-day ceremony where you'll get to have your full ritual and ceremony of initiation. And so if you're interested more in that, I'm going to do a full information session on that. And fingers crossed, I'm hoping we're going to meet in Greece. Yeah, it's going to be transcendent. That's what I'm going to say. We are taking no prisoners. We're going all in. You're going to get to really align with a specific archetype that you're wanting to fully engage or that's been coming alive through the experience. And you're going to have an opportunity to go through a proper initiation and the proper steps of initiation. So it's bold, it's committed, and it's going to be really wonderful. I'm really excited for it. Okay. And so we're going to start in December, but I have an information session that's just committed to that course, and you can register for it through Zoom. And that link is right there. And then if you want just like a little nibble, I want to introduce you to one of the story ceremonies that initiated me. And I had no idea what it was going to be. I knew, that there's one thing that I can really support people, and it's truly understanding the genius as it wants to emerge through you. And that's not like an egotistical term of genius. It's how Michael Mead speaks of it. It's how the Romans on your birthday, they celebrated your genius. That's what they celebrated. It wasn't even you. It was your genius. It was known that we all had one, And so I really trust when these impulses of life emerge. And one of mine was really around creating and bringing together story and ceremony and going into these big stories that were haunting our times and bringing healing to them and doing it in ceremony, in a collective group intention that's guarded and protected and all the things. And so the first story that I ever did which was Story of the Witch. Starhawk actually came to our second event. It was an extraordinary experience to get to feature her and honor her. And we've done these, I've toured them all around the country, from New York to San Francisco. And we're going to be alchemizing this aspect of the story that has haunted so many people for so long. It's a 2.5, 3 hour experience. This time we're doing it online. I'm going to get to do it with Kelsey, who Barrett, who was a woman who I started off on this journey with many years ago. And so you're going to get introduced to what is it to weave story, herbs, not ones that like just plant medicine, but not hallucinogenic plant medicine. We'll be working with rosemary. We're going to be working with wakame. And what is it to get to alchemize and really tend to an old story, bring some healing aspects to it, some ritual to it, and to call in a new story. And it's our first time ever doing it online. Pretty sure this event will sell out. You're going to want to get a couple of materials in advance. So if you want to come to that, I would say hop on over and get your ticket and get your list of materials, and that's going to be a really lovely experience. That was a mouthful. So if you have any questions, I will stay on and answer any questions, but let me give you this final wonderful quote. And this quote comes to you via Martha Graham. It's one of my favorite quotes. There is a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there's only one of you in all of time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium, and it will be lost. Gosh, she was dramatic. The world will not have it. It is not your business to determine how good it is, nor how valuable, nor how it compares with other expressions. It is your business to keep it yours, clearly and directly, to keep the channel open. You do not even have to believe in yourself or your work. All you have to do is keep yourself open and aware to the urges that motivate you. Keep your channel open. That's by Martha Graham. That is our class for today. And yeah, if anyone has questions, I'll stay on for a couple of extra moments. And away we go. Thank you for being here. If you want, you can take yourselves off mute and we can all say a good farewell.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Leah.
Thank you, Leah. See you on Wednesday. It's Nazneen.
Thank you so much for your authenticity.
Thank you, Leah.